No man do they call me. My mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Welcome to my channel, where I share my Warhammer 40k stories for all to enjoy. Please consider liking and subscribing, and if you enjoy this content...
Get to the story already!
Yes, right. Back to Gutzmangul's Boyz.
Chapter 3. Orkz is made for Rokkin.
The Orkz broke like a wave over the fleeing swarm of humanity in their path. The PDF had barely begun to raise the alarm when Gutzmangul's Boyz began to hack into the teeming masses of humanity. With the hive so densely packed, civilians were pressed shoulder to shoulder trying to flee the sudden green onslaught. They were easy pickings for orc choppers, and the sound of metal cleaving into flesh filled the air, punctuated by full-throated war cries, chaotic bursts of shooter-fire, and the occasional dull thump of discipline. As the fight on the ground was getting underway, the fight in the sky was just beginning. Captain Crump streaked towards the turrets. Lasfire began to fill the air as several orcs around the good captain took hits. Most of those boys took the shots on their sturdy orc frame, leaving nasty burn marks, but not enough to kill a proper dead-hard boy. A few other boys were hitting the rocket and spiraled out of control before smashing headlong into the towers of the lower hive structures, much to the amusement of the captain. More and more Humies seemed to be poking lasguns from the countless ports, filling the skies with a nasty crossfire.
Give him the good Daka! Then let's give him the good choppy!
The storm boys descended like an angry mob of locusts. The soldiers below were firing their lasguns on full auto into the mob. But it wasn't going to be enough. Weathering a hail of superheated energy blasts, the captain emptied his slugger clip before slamming into the gun emplacement tower. The orc captain landed hard, his steel-shod boots crushing a defender's chest before he threw his empty slugger at the commanding officer, catching the poor bastard square in the face with a red, wet crunch. As the commander fell to the ground, gurgling through the mess that used to be his face, Crump pulled his chopper through the midsection of a panicking soldier, before grabbing another by the head and flinging him backwards off the kilometers-high tower. Back on the ground, slugger boys and shooter boys were making a proper mess of things. Human bodies packed the streets and the orcs pulped them underfoot as they surged forward. After the initial shock, the Humies started to put up some kind of fight. Weedy hivers were popping out of ports, taking pot shots at the mob or dropping grenades, blowing a fair few boys to bits. The boys were answering with a few stick bombs of their own. Suddenly, there was a dull roar coming from the depths of the Git Smasher that rapidly grew loud enough to be heard over the din of battle. Another round of screeching feedback tore through the rock's damaged sound system.
Yeah. Right. I think I did it. Ready, boss? Whoa!
Suddenly, the familiar licks of Axe Boy Jax in the Maniacs filled the air, this time at a frenetic gallop. The roar of powerful engines continued to grow, crescendoing with the play of the rockers as a huge battle wagon burst from the wreck of the Git Smasher. Gimzod the mech was at the wheel, with dozens of boys on board, working the big guns, burners, and grabby claw. In the back, the Maniacs were playing furiously as Warboss Gutzmangul stood prominently in the center of the wagon, roaring his lungs out, and on the side of the wagon was emblazoned in big, black, jagged letters, Rokka Rekka. With a fancy new red paint job, Rokka Rekka screamed into battle, guns blazing, tearing through flesh and rockcrete alike. Within moments, dozens of humans were pulped by Daka, burnt to cinders by a burner, or painting the treads of the battle wagon with their guts. The Rokka Rekka took a screeching hard right down one of the broader causeways of the hive, and Gutzmangul suddenly heard the familiar trundle as a Lehman Russ battle tank came into view, swung its turret towards the orc vehicle, and fired. The shell struck Gutzmangul, glancing off the shoulder of his mega armor before deflecting up into the left speakers of Demaniacs. The Warboss fell backwards, nearly mashing Jax, who managed to hop out of the way. Gutzmangul's eyes filled with rage as he roared for blood. He shoved himself back on his feet and began to force the Rokkin to quickly close the gap between the two vehicles, which promptly began to exchange small arms fire. A few rakes ran over the Rokkin with heavy bolters, tore through about a half dozen Orkz and into the wagon's plating. To Gutzmangul's right, Log took a bolt right in the forehead before the shell burst his skull in a bloody mess. Gutzmangul's own mega armor was dinged, scratched, and pitted, but he remained unharmed. The Rokkin smashed into the Lehman Rush, and enormous Imperial tank was forced into the air by the wagon's front-mounted Ripper. The Ork crew quickly began to swarm over the tank. Gutzmangul stomped forward and took a running leap. He landed just in front of the main gun, and before it could fire, he took his claw, gripped the cannon, and bent the gun back on itself. Snickwit hopped off the boss's shoulder and used his grot burner liberally, pouring promethium down the gun ports, much to the displeasure of those inside. Jax followed the boss's lead, leaping onto the tank and smashing his axe into the hatch, protecting the vulnerable Humi crew inside. Gimzod was quick to follow him with a stick bomb, tossing the crude explosive down the hatch.
Dead hard on the outside, real squishy on the inside.
There was a loud bang, followed by swearing and cries of pain. The remaining Orks swarmed inside the tank and began finishing off the crew. Gutzmangul stood over the conquered tank and roared in victory. He grinned widely as he scanned the battlefield. Captain Crump had turned the big guns against the Humies and was now firing wildly into the population below. The dread mobs and killicans were finally trundling out of the rock and added to the mayhem. Squighead and his boys had put most of the Humies on the run, while Grotz and some of the smaller boys were swarming the cramped hive buildings to weed out some of those sneakier Humies. Everything seemed to be going just as planned. Not that any of this was planned. Just as Gutzmangul was savoring the screams of his enemies, a massive explosion ripped through a hab complex 100 meters from the Git Smasher. Another shell screamed down from the sky and hit the opposite side. Gutzmangul squinted and could see a massive warship blotting out the sun as it began orbital bombardment on the Orkish positions. A third and a fourth followed, incinerating Boyz as it smashed into a tightly macked mob. The ground shook and cracked with each explosion. A fifth hit the Git Smasher directly. A huge cloud of smoke and scrap rose as the Humies continued their relentless bombardment, intent on wiping out the Orks no matter the cost. The massive Ork rock was resilient and could probably take a few more direct hits before being completely obliterated. However, the ground it stood on appeared to be much less sturdy. With the sound of screeching, twisting metal filling the air, the hive support structures cracked and gave way as a massive gash of metal and stone opened beneath the Git Smasher, swallowing the Ork ship entirely as it plunged into the depths of the hives.
They's gonna frag us all to Zorg if we sit here gawping. Leg it, boys! Go to ground!
As the Warboss saw his quick victory lost, the skies began to rain Daka. Tune in next week when we resume with Chapter 4, The Day It Rained Daka. Thank you once again for listening. This has been No Man.